80-year-old James Craig Cope owned a convenience store in Norco for more than 5 decades. While his business might have seen ups and downs through the years, he probably didn't come across an incident as shocking as the one that took place in July 2022. Surveillance cameras in his store captured the moment an armed robber tried to rob him early in the morning. But he wasn't prepared for what came next. Let's take a look at what unfolded on that day. On July 31st, 2022, 80-year-old James Craig Cope was in his shop in the 800 block of 6th Street in Norco, California, manning the cash in the early hours of the morning. He owned the convenience store named Norco Market and Liquor since 1967 and never missed a day at work. At around 2:45 a.m., security footage of the store showed a man wearing an orange hoodie and a mask on his face entering the store. He had a rifle in his hands. He pointed it at Cope and asked him to put his hands in the air.
It's a brazen robbery. A suspect walks into a liquor store armed with an assault rifle.
Cope could be seen on the other end of the store. He reached out behind the counter momentarily and then brought out his weapon. He got only a few seconds to act, and he didn't hesitate before pointing the gun at the robber and firing at him.
But the store owner is ready. Even though he's 80 years old, he has the reflexes of a teenager and opens fire.
The bullet hit the robber in his arm. He screamed and ran out of the shop, telling his fellow robbers that the bullet had struck his arm. After that, he jumped into their car, which investigators later identified as a black BMW X3, and started to drive off. One of the 4 robbers was struggling to get inside the car, so the driver halted for a few seconds before picking him up and driving away from the place. Despite scaring off the robber, Cope stood guard with his gun inside the store in case the robbers decided to return. There were 4 of them, and he didn't want to take any risk.
Meanwhile, 80-year-old Craig Cope stands guard with his rifle in hand in case any trouble comes back.
But how did Cope know that those robbers were trying to attack him? Well, reportedly, after a sharp increase in the number of robberies in the area, he installed surveillance cameras that informed him what happened around his store. When the robbers arrived, Cope saw them on the screen and was mentally getting prepared to protect himself.
After a recent uptick in robberies in the area, the owner installed high-tech security cameras around the perimeter of the property. When the suspects pulled up to the store, the owner was watching them on his monitor, ready to defend his business.
Unfortunately, right after the incident, Cope suffered from a heart attack. The sudden surge of hormones and the firing might have had an effect on his heart. He was rushed to the hospital immediately.
Of course, of this caliber is very stressful, traumatic. The business owner, who is 80 years old, did have a heart attack right after the shooting.
However, he recovered from the setback like a champ. Reports said that Cope was out of danger and would be discharged shortly afterward.
But the good news is that I spoke with him this afternoon. He's doing better, and he will be out of the hospital tonight.
The police found all 4 suspects at a Southern California hospital. The robber who was fired at was receiving treatment. The officers left him but arrested the other 3. They took them to jail. The wounded robber was set to join his 3 mates after he was ready to be discharged from the hospital.
As for the 4 suspects, they have been arrested. 3 have been arrested. The 4th one, the guy who got is still in the hospital, but once he's released, he will be going to jail.
After the incident went viral, reporters went to the store to talk to the locals. The shop had been around for many years, and so the locals knew Cope well. According to reports, they all said they were happy that Cope had stood up for himself and his safety.
That almost everyone in this town is very proud of the way this business owner handled himself.
The reporter showed the location behind the shop, where the robbers parked their vehicle, before one of them walked out with a gun and entered the shop.
There were 4 armed robbers, and they were parked right here. By the time they went inside, they got the surprise of their lives.
Reporters talked to a few customers who frequented the shop and asked them to share their thoughts about the incident. One of them said that the robbers deserved what they got here.
I guess he gets what he deserves, so piece is done.
Another customer said that the crime rate had increased and almost everything was controlled by these goons. Cope had given him a clear message through this incident. They couldn't always get their way.
The criminals are in control of everything right now, and the fact that they turned around and showed them what for, I think it's amazing.
Another customer said that these perpetrators often felt entitled and never really bothered much about the repercussions. But this time, they learned that they couldn't continue to be that way even if they wanted to.
Everybody's brazen and thinks that they are owed everything and that they can do whatever they want, and it's not right to do that to people.
The next customer stated that all businesses should find a way to protect themselves.
More businesses should be armed like that and defend their businesses like that.
The reporters found the monitor placed right beside the cash counter, where Cope could watch the robbers pull up. It gave him a few seconds to take in the details and prepare himself mentally. He observed them carefully and knew that they were up to no good.
The owner was standing right here watching all of the action on the security camera. As soon as he saw one of those guys pull the mask over his face, he knew trouble was headed his way.
A customer said that he stood there, watched the men act suspicious, and just prepared himself for some action.
He just prepared himself. He prepared himself and he stood right here and he just aimed. He aimed and...
Another customer added that he never supported gun violence, but the robbers deserved that. Cope never initiated violence, but the men in masks did. He also claimed that when criminals tried to harm us mindlessly, it was our job to protect ourselves, just like Cope had.
You know, I'm not for gun violence, but he wasn't the one doing the violence. The people that came in were the ones doing the violence. And that's what we need to understand in our society. When people are doing violence against us, we have the right to protect ourselves.
A young customer who often came to the store said that he had seen Cope a few times in the store and believed him to be a cool and brave person.
I've seen him a couple of times while I've been here, and honestly, I can kind of expect that from him. He seems like a pretty bad old man.
Reporters also spoke to Cope's long-term employee, who also confirmed that Cope had seen the men in the camera and knew they were armed. "It's not his first rodeo," said a woman named Marnie, who works for the store's owner, 80-year-old Craig Cope. He saw on the surveillance, he saw them coming out of the vehicle with weapons. She said that the cameras gave him a few extra seconds to prepare for what was coming, and she believed that her boss was alive because of the cameras. "It saved his life, I think it did," Marnie said of Cope's newly installed high-definition surveillance cameras. According to her, the local sheriff has visited their store recently and warned them about the sudden spike in robbery cases. "The sheriff came in and warned me, about 8 months or so, that this was going on and to keep an eye out and pay attention. Be on your toes," Marnie told CBS LA's Jake Reiner. She sounded happy and proud, and said that Cope made them feel protected and well cared for. "I'm proud to call him my boss," Marnie told CBS LA. "He makes us feel better about being here, you know." Reporters said that more and more people were coming to the store after the incident to support the business, because this was the first time someone had shown the courage to stand up for themselves, and the customers just wanted to encourage them to keep following the path.
There were a lot of people coming in just to support the business and say they're very proud of the way he acted.
Reporters had a chance to speak with Cope's wife, who seemed proud of her husband's gun skills. She also elaborated on the treatment he was receiving. "The guy is in the hospital, in critical condition. So it must have been a pretty good," Cope's wife said. "Cope needed 3 stents following his heart attack, but he's out of the hospital and recovering." She had a chilling message to add to the local criminals. Cope's wife said the shooting sends one message: "Stay out of Norco, because everybody in Norco has a gun," she said. Cope was released from the hospital after he received treatment for his heart attack. Despite suffering from this ordeal, he was healthy and was able to return to work soon. Reporters rushed to his store to speak to him and get his testimony on how the incident unfolded that morning and what was going through his mind when he pulled the trigger on the robber. The reporters first wanted to know what he was thinking when he first saw the robbers coming through that door with a weapon in his hands. Cope said that he didn't really have much time to think about it because he had a gun pointing at him, and he acted instantly.
There wasn't much time to think about it. It was just the guy pointed the gun directly at me, then it's him or me.
The reporter said that she would freeze and die if it were her in that stressful situation, like any other person would. But how did Cope know what to do at that moment? He said that he saw the gun and knew what kind it was, and he knew that it could be lethal if the robber could fire even one bullet. So he acted as quickly as he could and got him first.
I am not going to give him the chance. I mean, if I recognize the weapon, that's a semi-automatic gun, fast you can pull the trigger, maybe someone convert it to automatic, it's equivalent of a machine gun. I'm not going to let him get the first off at that point.
The reporter then mentioned that people all over California were praising Cope's actions against the robbers because they were just as tired trying to protect their businesses from goons who robbed them left and right, and they didn't know how to protect themselves. But Cope sounded humble when answering it. He said that if anyone else was in his place, they would have done the same. He also said that more people needed to stand up for themselves and protest, and it was the only way to control crime.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I did anything that somebody else wouldn't have done, but two things. We need more people to stand up.
He sounded weary when he added that the root cause of growing violence was probably the politicians and their lax policies. He claimed that there weren't too many good people out there, and if the politicians didn't create stricter laws and punish the existing criminals, nothing good would come out of it.
But more than that, probably get on the wrong side of some people here, but the politicians, there's people out there that are not the best of people.
He added that people were now choosing to be criminals. He told the reporter a story about the time a man proudly told him that he was a burglar. He was being arrested for something, and he still wasn't ashamed, and was telling Cope that's what his job was. He also told him how he did his job, which astonished Cope.
There's people that choose to be burglars. There's people that choose to be armed robbers. And I had one guy one time, he told me specifically he was a burglar. I mean, I had him in handcuffs. He was going to jail, and he's talking to me. He's a burglar. He says, that's what I do. He says, I wait till it gets dark and I go burglarize places.
He pointed at the fact that these people were continuously being released from prison, even after being arrested, and that's how they felt safe choosing the path of crime. They knew they would never be punished, and that's why they became robbers and criminals once again.
So these people that can continually get let out now, it's been really bad the last year, those people, the majority of them, are going to go right back to what they used to do.
Cope said that this was one of the reasons the crime rate was rising at such an alarming rate. And he said that until and unless law enforcement started punishing the criminals and locked them up, the numbers would never go down and the people would continue to suffer. He added that calling the police wasn't the best course of action here because they couldn't come to the scene that quickly. People could get fired at within seconds.
So the crime rate is escalating. It's going to continue to escalate until they start putting the people away that are doing the bad things. And as far as here and my place, it wouldn't do any good to call the local sheriffs. They can't get here that quick.
He then said how quick his action was on that fateful day. He first saw the robbers pull up, and it took them only about 10 seconds to walk around the building and enter the store. And from that time to him pulling out his gun and firing at the robber took another few seconds. That's how fast it all happened. And there was no way a sheriff could have made his way here from his office in seconds.
This whole thing, from the time I saw him coming around the side of the building to coming in the door, and what happened, 10 seconds. The actual thing from when he pointed his gun at me, half, 3/4 of a second, because I'm not waiting. When you point that gun directly at me and you're that close to me and I see what you're carrying, I'm not waiting.
The reporter then asked him about the first tip-off that told him the men outside his shop were robbers when he first saw them on the surveillance footage. Cope said that he saw the car drive into the property through the door, but the driver took the car to an unusual spot. A normal customer would never park there. He knew something was wrong here.
First tip-off, I saw him through the front door drive into this parking lot, but they didn't park where a normal person would park. So that was a red flag.
He noticed that after scouring the lot, the driver had chosen a spot to park where the camera couldn't reach them. Cope knew that this wasn't normal behavior and started preparing for trouble.
Then they parked on the side of the building where they're basically out of sight. That was the second red flag.
And eventually, when he saw that the man walking out of the vehicle was wearing masks and gloves and also had a rifle in his hands, he was sure that they would attempt to rob him. He checked his gun and prepared for the worst.
When I looked and saw them getting out of the vehicle, they got gloves, masks, a weapon. That just solidified the deal for me. I knew what was coming.
The reporter spoke to him about the heart attack and asked how he was doing at the moment. Cope seemed fine and as healthy as he appeared in the surveillance footage. He said that the stress and pressure from the traumatic event had pushed him to the edge. But he also joked and said that had probably just become old.
As far as I know, I'm doing better. I'm doing a lot better than I was that night.
Was traumatic?
Yeah, I don't know what caused it. Maybe I'm just old.
The reporter praised him, saying that despite being 80 years old, his reflexes and wits to protect himself were amazing. Many people wouldn't even know what to do in that situation, but he had managed to show how to protect his life and his business within seconds. She then asked if he had any advice for other business owners who were going through the same trouble. Cope said that the others could follow in his footsteps and act in self-defense. However, that wouldn't solve the root cause. He told the other business owners to put pressure on the local politicians so that they would be open to considering the real situation and take action accordingly.
Okay, yeah, you can do what I did, but what you really need to do is put some pressure on the politicians because they got no clue what's really going on out here in the real world.
He said that many such politicians were sitting idle and not paying attention to the thousands of lives that were at risk because of imbalanced law and order. He said that apart from business owners, local law enforcement also had their lives at risk because they were putting themselves at stake to catch them, only to have them released at the end of the day. It was counterproductive and dangerous.
I could start naming names, but there's a whole lot of them that are creating major problems for business owners, but for local law enforcement, they're creating problems for them. I'm sure they go out and risk their lives taking people into custody to see them get let out with no bail.
He stated that one-time criminals or people who broke a few rules accidentally could be exempted, but people who made crime their career were the actual threats to society. He said that these repeat offenders should be locked up mandatorily if the government really wanted to see an improvement.
And a lot of these people are career criminals. I'm not talking about the guy that goofed up one time, made one mistake. I'm talking about the career criminals. They're career criminals. They need to be locked up.
The reporter then asked him if this situation repeated, would he hesitate to fire at the perpetrators once again? His answer was a firm no.
So, if this were to happen again, you would not hesitate?
No.
She then asked him to leave a message to the criminals. He said that wherever they went to rob, his shop would be a bad idea because they would always run the risk of losing their lives or getting seriously wounded if they dared to rob him.
Your message to the bad guys?
This isn't a good place to pick.
Yeah, that's right. This isn't a good place to pick.
But the reporter needed to know one other thing, how he managed to mark his target and lodge a bullet into him so accurately, and that too, within a fraction of a second. She asked him if he had any professional training or was in the military, but it seemed that he didn't. Cope told her that he grew up in Illinois and learned to fire a gun when he was only 10 years old. Back then, he would often go hunting and bring home some game.
When I was a kid, when I was 10, I had a gun, and I grew up in Illinois. We had a lot of small game, squirrels, rabbits, quail. I put a lot of food on the table on a regular basis.
Bullets were pretty expensive, and if he wanted to hunt, he would have to do it with limited bullets. So he knew he couldn't miss the shots he fired, and the practice turned him into a perfect shot.
I had a single shot, so ammunition was expensive when I had to buy it myself. 50 cents was a lot of money, and you don't want to miss. You don't miss.
Yeah.
So it still holds true.
The reporter laughed and said, the person Cope fired at was lucky to be alive. If he got his chest, it would be game over for him. But this is where his accuracy probably came to use. He knew where to fire and aimed the arm, not his chest. Cope added that if such incidents ever occurred again, he would always try to save everyone on his property. I would always protect my employees, my customers, myself, he said. This instance, fortunately, I was here by myself, so I only had to worry about that. I took care of it, and that was that. An investigation later found that the BMW that the robbers used for robbery was actually stolen. The officers found multiple stolen weapons inside the car, too. All 4 robbers are now in jail and are being held on $500,000 bail. All 4 of them were charged with robbery and conspiracy. Unfortunately, Cope passed away in December 2022, only 6 months after the incident, suffering from unknown health complications. But his memories would remain with the community forever. His family posted an update on Norco Market and Liquor's Facebook page on 27th of December saying, "We lost our Craig this morning." They also reportedly held a memorial at the store. While this case is inspiring, it's also a message to law enforcement and local leaders to take the necessary steps. Cope was alone in the store, and the matter became manageable quickly. However, if there were multiple robbers and multiple weapons, things could have ended differently. It's also worth noting that a shootout can occur anytime a store owner engages in a gun battle with armed robbers. Unlike this case, there can be casualties and innocent people can get hurt. So, locals should try to convince the leaders to take stricter actions against these perpetrators to ensure their safety. What did you think of the case? Do you think Cope did the right thing by firing at the robber? Do you think more business owners in California would follow in his footsteps? Do you think others will find the same courage to stand up for themselves as Cope had? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.